Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning as we explore, are you making or breaking your website accessibility? I'm your host, Jim Brophy, Group Director of Digital here at Northwoods. If you manage a website or are responsible for adding content to it, you can personally make or break your site from an accessibility perspective. Make sure you're making it by doing everything you can to ensure compliance. This morning, we will share through live examples critical tips and reminders for how to manage website content to meet current accessibility standards, including header images and usage, color contrast requirements, links and content, hover states, mobile design elements, icon utilization, text overlays, forms, and much, much more. We will also review the pending European Accessibility Act. Joining me today is our UX practice lead, Jenna Dean. Jenna has been with Northwoods now for over 9 years. Jenna listens closely to understand clients' goals and uncover solutions for their marketing, design, and accessibility challenges. Jenna specializes in developing wireframes and prototypes with a strong focus on UX UI and collaborates with Northwoods UX strategists to ensure that user research guides the design process. Jenna has a wealth of experience designing for data and creates stunning page layouts that showcase complex information in a digestible, accessible format. Away from Northwoods, Jenna enjoys downhill skiing, and her fuel of choice is Dr. Pepper. And be on the lookout for her cats Viper, Saber, and Flash, who might make an unscheduled guest appearance today. If you have questions during the presentation, use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions at any time, and we will answer as many as we can during our Q&A session immediately following the presentation. Also, please feel free to use the chat to connect with our team and other attendees or share real-time feedback with Jenna using the reactions button in the bottom toolbar. We will also address questions we receive from folks when registering for today's class. Additionally, we'll be sending out a recording of today's webinar in the next few days, so you'll be able to rewatch it or share it with your colleagues. Okay, so before I turn things over to Jenna, I'd like to serve up a poll question. Poll question number 1, because we do have several today, how confident do you feel about your knowledge of web accessibility? A, very confident. I apply accessibility best practices regularly. B, somewhat confident. I know some basics, but can learn more. C, not very confident. I know accessibility is important, but I'm not sure how to apply it. And D, not confident at all. This is a new topic for me. So we're going to bring up the questions and the answers here. If you wouldn't mind just taking a few seconds to respond, then we'll look at the answers. All right, B is the clear winner here. Somewhat confident. I know some basics, but could learn more. And a few others that may not be quite as confident. And we see that there are no A's, and that's pretty typical, so I wouldn't be too worried about that. So thank you, everybody, for taking that poll. Before we continue, I'd like to say a few words about the European Accessibility Act. So what is the European Accessibility Act? The EAA, or European Accessibility Act, is a EU directive that requires products and services to be accessible to people with disabilities. It applies to physical products, digital platforms, and services sold in the EU. So let's talk about who needs to comply. So any organization selling consumer-facing products, for example, self-service machines, consumer electronics, those types of things. Companies offering digital services such as websites, e-commerce platforms, mobile apps, and software, and businesses that export to the EU, even if they're based outside of Europe. So what are the key areas of compliance? Well, really, when you're talking about the EAA in general, digital accessibility or any organization selling consumer-facing products, like I said, right? So one of the things that's interesting about this is that if you're looking at those kind of products, you're also looking at the accessibility for those products. So websites, e-commerce platforms, mobile apps, all must meet what we call WCAG 2.1 Level AA guidelines. And WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Also, product usability. Hardware, such as ATMs, e-readers, and smartphones, all must be accessible with voice controls and touch sizing and those types of things. And information and documentation, user manuals, customer support, technical specs, all of this information that's available online must be available in accessible formats. So that would be like text to speech or braille or large print. So when does this take effect? Well, the law was passed in 2019, and the final compliance deadline is June 28th, 2025. After this date, noncompliance could result in fines, legal action, and bans on selling products in the EU. So what should you be doing right now if you fit that criteria? Well, I would definitely conduct an accessibility audit of your website, your online catalogs, and your e-commerce platforms. Also take a look at your software and apps. And some of the tools that you can use for checking are tools such as WebAIM, Wave, Google Lighthouse, Axe, and Jenna is going to be showing some of these tools in action here in just a few moments. And the other really important thing, at the very least, make sure you have an accessibility statement on your website. An accessibility statement gives your users an idea of how accessible your site is. And if they have any challenges in consuming content, there's a phone number or an email by which they can contact you to request that content in some type of an accessible format. At the very least, if you have an accessibility statement on your site, you're also going to dissuade trolls. Right now, there are a lot of people out there that are trolling websites for lack of accessibility and reporting them. A lot of settlements and lawsuits that are going out. The United States has rules and regulations and those WCAG guidelines, but countries outside of the US, particularly Canada and now the EU coming up in May of 2025, are going to have these rules and regulations in place. So test your site, make sure you've got an accessibility statement, and then if you do business in the EU, make sure you comply to the fullest extent that you're able to. Okay, let's serve up another poll here real quick. And so poll question number 2 is, why is accessibility important? So our answers are, A, it improves usability for everyone, not just those with disabilities. B, it helps organizations avoid legal risks. C, it expands audience reach and engagement. D, A and B only. E, A and C only. Or F, all of the above. I'll give you a second to come back with your responses. And taking us home here, I'm going to have Jenna actually address the responses and discuss those quickly, and then she's going to go through her live looks and the rest of our presentation. So take it away, Jenna.
Wow, 100% said F, all of the above. That's great. Thanks, Jim. And to follow up on that poll, that is correct. The answer is F, all of the above. So good job, everyone. So website accessibility improves the website for all users, not just users with disabilities. Many accessibility features, such as like a clear navigation, readable fonts, and keyboard-friendly design, improve the experience for all users, not just those with disabilities. And again, making sure your website addresses the needs of all these users will help keep you away from those legal risks. But then just how does it expand audience reach and engagement? Well, approximately 1 in 4 adults in the US have a disability. So an accessible website does ensure that millions of potential users can engage with your content, and users are more likely to stay on your website and interact with this content if they can easily navigate and consume all that information, regardless of their abilities or what devices they're using. So now I do want to shift gears and focus on the content management side of accessibility, because there are many accessibility considerations to keep in mind as you edit, update, or add new pages of content to your website. So let me just pull up my screen here. And first I want to talk about heading structure. So it's important to use a clear and logical structure for headings, but this can get a little bit confusing, so I do want to walk through what that means. So this first column here has an H1, H2, all the way down to an H6. You'll notice that the H1 is the biggest, and then it gets a little bit smaller as you get down to an H6. And that's because the H1 is the most important, and the H6 is the least important typically, so the size is representing that hierarchy as well. I also want to note that you do typically just want one H1 on a page, and that's more for SEO purposes to help Google search engines crawl your website and truly understand what that page is about. But it is unrealistic to expect that you'll have a page with one H1, one H2, one H3, all the way down to one H6. That's really not how content works. It's a little bit more fluid than that. So if we look at the second column here, we go 1, 2, 3, all the way to 4, and then we jump back to 2, and then we have 2 3s. This will also pass as well, because what you need to know about heading structure is once you have an H1, you go to an H2, you can have multiple H2s, do an H3, go to an H4, and you have to follow the order as you kind of cascade down. But then you can restart. So let's say I don't, H4, that's done with that section of content. I'm ready to move on to the next piece. I can jump to an H2, and then I kind of have to start cascading down again. So this right here will pass for accessibility. Where you don't pass for accessibility because you're not using a logical structure for your headings is this third column. So you see we have an H1, and then we jump to an H3, and we're skipping that H2 value, and that's what you can't do. And then we're resetting at an H2, but then we're jumping to an H5, skipping that H3 and that H4, and then H4 here skips that H5 and jumps to that H6. So as you go down, you can't skip values like that. You have to follow this order, and it's okay to have the same headings next to each other as well. And then this fourth column here, what I wanted to represent is, like I mentioned earlier, usually the H1s are the largest, and then it gets smaller and smaller as you get down to this H6. So sometimes what I've noticed when I look at people's content is that the H2 is too big for some spaces where you have those longer headings. So what people typically do is they just change it to an H3 or an H4 because those are typically smaller and will fill that space better. But that does break the structure for accessibility and even SEO. So instead, what you want to do is leave it as an H2, but manually override the size to make it a little bit smaller. And that will keep your heading structure intact and then still look good within that space. I do want to note, though, that if you are finding yourself making that H2 smaller a lot, then it's just time to reevaluate the sizing of your overall heading structure so you're not constantly manually overriding that, because you do want to try your best to keep this hierarchy of size in place as well for visual scanning purposes. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn on this wave tool. And this wave tool is just an extension on Chrome that kind of helps evaluate the accessibility of your website. And you can see that there are no errors on this first column, this second column, or this last column, but there are errors on this third column, like I predicted. And then if you click on it, it just says, hey, you skipped a heading level, you skipped a heading level, you skipped a heading level. So that is just what you need to kind of be conscious of when creating headings for your website. Why is the heading structure important? Well, it does create a clear structure of content for your web page, but it also allows users with assistive technologies like screen readers to easily navigate your website by jumping between these different heading levels. So basically, as visual users use the headings to scan the content to better navigate to what information they're looking for, these technologies do the same thing by scanning through those headings like visual users would. So if we have the headings like this third column messed up, then the screen reader kind of jumps around the page in a way that's not intuitive to users. Now, I do want to talk about the color palette as well, because content editors must be conscious of how colors can be used together when presenting written content. So you'll see I have this color palette here, and we just need to make sure that we're meeting the requirements, which says that if you're using certain colors together, you need a contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1 for normal text and 3 to 1 for large text. And this is just to ensure that the color combinations you're using for written context has enough contrast for all users, even those with visual impairments. So if I go to this button here, it's going to open up this accessibility color palette builder. So I just took this color palette here and I entered all of those hex values here, and then I gave the colors names. So you can input your own colors here. And then if you scroll down here, it does show you how you can use those colors together to ensure that there's enough contrast in your content. So you can see this dark teal here and this white color, which is entered up here, do have enough contrast because we're seeing the colors working together. And then if you hover your cursor over it, it does even say the contrast ratio of white on dark teal is 11:1. So we're really meeting contrast needs here. However, when we have all these grayed out little boxes, that means that color combination does not work. So in this case, this dark teal background and this green text don't have enough contrast to work together. And then if you hover over that box, I see a message here that says do not use green text on dark teal background. It's not compliant. It has a contrast ratio of 4.12:1, which is kind of close to 4.5:1, but it doesn't meet those needs. So I do like to always have white in here because a lot of websites use a white background. So you can see that this dark teal, this like darker burnt orange color, and this blue are all accessible with white. However, this yellow, this green, and obviously this white are not accessible with white. And then another thing you might notice is this green background right here doesn't seem to be accessible with anything. That doesn't mean you can't use that brand color on your website. It just means you can't use it with content like your headings or your paragraph text because there's not enough contrast there. You can still use it as like an accent color or a decoration in your design to maintain that color. You just can't use it for words. So if I jump back here, one thing I wanted to point out is sometimes you need to know what the contrast ratio is of colors because you might be super close to meeting the requirements. So for example, this blue right here is 4.43:1, and you need it to be 4.5:1 to work with white here to meet those contrast ratio requirements. So if you make it just a little bit darker, then you have more flexibility with that color. And then it doesn't really affect your brand very much because the color is such a slightly different shade that many users won't even notice. And I'm not even sure if all of you guys are able to see it here, but this box right here is just a slightly darker shade of blue than over here. So this one will not pass requirements, but this one will. And then again, for large text requirements, that's defined as typically 14 points, typically 18.66 pixels in bold, or 18 points, typically 24 pixels in large. So this green actually does work with white under large text requirements. So this small text right here will not pass because it's 18 pixels in regular and it needs to be 18.66 in bold. However, this 20 pixels in bold and this 24 pixels in regular size text will pass. So again, if I open up this wave tool, you'll see that, yep, this doesn't pass because it's really close to meeting the contrast ratio needs. It's just a little bit far away. This one does pass, and then the small text doesn't pass, but this larger text option does pass. So kind of giving you a little bit more confirmation on what works. However, not all color updates are as minimal as this blue change was. Yellow is really, you can't really get it a bright yellow to work with white. It's very far away. So this contrast here is basically 2:1. However, you can still use white with text. You just have to use darker text. So if I use this black text here, we have a 10:1 contrast ratio, which is great. But if you really did want to use yellow with white, you can see how dark you have to make it in order to meet those contrast ratio needs. So it definitely is changing that brand color a little bit more dramatically than what we saw up here. So in this case, you might just want to stick with using a darker text. And then a tool that you can use to kind of see how close the colors are to meeting requirements is this Web Aim tool that I think Jim mentioned as well. And so what I can do is I can take this hex value and I can enter it in here. And then I can see, yep, it only has a 2:1 ratio with white. And then you can actually use the slider to kind of, oh, now we're meeting the large text requirements. And if you keep sliding it, okay, now we're meeting the dark text requirements. So it kind of helps you navigate how far away you are from meeting the normal text and large text requirements needed with that color combination. All right, so again, it's just really important to use really strong contrast for people who have developed visual disabilities, which happens as you age, or people who have had temporary visual impairments from surgeries or medical conditions, or people who are dealing with different forms of color blindness. So meeting these requirements doesn't just apply to those users, but it does make reading your content easy just for everyone, not just users with disabilities. Okay. So now let's talk about links and content. So in these 2 paragraphs of content, I have 3 links. You might be able to see them, but people that have certain deficiencies will have a harder time recognizing it because it's just using color alone to indicate what's clickable versus what's not, and that's not accessible. So if I hover over this, these are where my 3 links are, but they don't immediately jump out at you. And so it can be really hard for a lot of users to understand or see that those are clickable elements. So instead, what you want to do for accessibility is just underline them. So here we're not relying on color alone to indicate what's clickable. We are also including an underline now. So it's really easy to see what is clickable here over what is clickable here. And then another thing to point out is that we have this icon on this link right here, and that is a common accessibility icon that indicates what links will take users to an external website, so away from your site. So you might be seeing this icon a little bit more and more and more, and hopefully you're familiar enough with it to know that this icon is being used to indicate to users that, hey, you're going to leave the site by clicking on this. So like the same concept applies with buttons where you can't rely on color alone to indicate what is clickable. So you have to ensure that the interactive states like hover effects are indicated by more than just a color change. So this first button here does not pass because you can see that it just goes from that dark teal color to a dark blue color. So that's not enough to indicate that this is clickable. This button here passes, even though it feels like it's just a color change, it's actually not. So the yellow text changes to that dark teal color and the dark teal background changes to the yellow color, and that's actually considered a contrast shift. So that does pass because the contrast change is so dramatic that many users will be able to recognize that. And then here, this obviously passes, even though the colors are following here. So, you know, the white text is staying white, the background is changing just to a slightly different color, but we're adding an icon on the hover effect here, which is like a shape change, which makes it rely more than just color change alone. And then this one passes as well because it's not just a contrast shift, but we're adding a border, which is considered a shape change as well. So that's another way that you can handle buttons to make sure they're accessible for your users. Another thing to point out is the learn more and click here text is very generic. So we want to try to be a little bit more prescriptive in what users can expect when they click the buttons. So right here we have view our services, which is a good descriptive text. You could have visit our blog, you could have contact us, just giving users a little bit more information besides learn more and click here to indicate where they're going to go. However, if you are forced to use the learn more or click here for whatever reason, you can do stuff on the back end with the alt text to make sure that it gives people using screen readers a little bit more information on where they can expect to go. So again, why can't you rely on color alone for color changes alone for hover effects? And it just addresses people that have vision deficiencies. So many people have forms of color blindness issues that they are working through, as well as according to various studies, this affects approximately 8% of men and 0.5% of women worldwide. So if the interactive states are only indicated by color changes, a lot of these users are missing those important visual cues. And then another question I get a lot is, it's not just a color change, my cursor's changing. So you can see that we just have that arrow, and then as soon as I hover over what's clickable, it changes to that hand. And so a lot of people are like, well, isn't that good enough? And it doesn't meet relay standards. It's also considered too subtle. And people who are using keyboard navigation don't even have cursors. They're not even using the cursors, and just your users expect more. So the cursor change isn't enough. Okay. Now let's jump into icons. So you can use universally recognizable icons, or you must pair them with text labels. So these dark teal icons here are considered universally recognizable icons. We have Facebook, YouTube, an email, chat, share, the location pin, a pause button, like a pause play button you'd see on a video, a calendar, that external link button, Wi-Fi, search, PDF, and download. So if I was to see this search icon on a website, I would know that if I click it, there's some sort of search field that I'm going to get. You commonly see the share button with print and email at the top of some pages, indicating that's how you can share the page. And if you see this little chat button in the lower right-hand side of your screen, you click on it, you're kind of going to expect a chat feature or option. However, these buttons over here that are this orange color are a little bit more ambiguous in meaning, and many users can interpret them differently. So we have like a pie chart, an apple, a bird, a cup, a bone, and those don't have any strong meaning associated with them. So that is where you'd want to pair them with text. These are considered more decorative pieces than anything else. So down here, you can see I'm using this apple to say, hey, check out our lunch menu, and this bird icon to be like, oh, look at our bird feed options. So it's just you really need to pair some of this with additional information because the icon alone isn't enough to indicate where or what the user can expect. And that's because these icons are ambiguous. Even the most well-designed icons may not be universally understood. So different users may interpret icons differently, leading to confusion. So adding descriptive text clarifies that meaning, ensuring users know exactly what that icon is representing. Great. So let's jump down to forms. Forms are super important. A lot of websites rely on forms as their main conversion point. So we definitely want to make sure that these forms are accessible for all users. So key things to make sure your forms are doing right is you want to ensure that your form labels, such as name, email, phone, your message, are very clear and visually connected to their input fields. And then when the user fills out a form incorrectly, you want to make sure you're displaying that error message clearly and close to the relevant form field. So right here, I'm just going to fill out just my name and put information in for an email, and then I'm going to try to submit this form. So what you're going to see is that I'm immediately notified that there was a problem with my submission and I need to review the form below. And then right here, it highlights exactly where the issues were. And in addition to telling me, you can also see that the form field has a bold border around it. And also in addition to telling me that these are the two fields I messed up, there's an additional information that tells me how I messed it up. So this email address entered is not valid. Please check the form. And it's like, I just wrote my name. I meant to write my whole email address. And then, oh, I didn't put in a message. Got it, because it says this field is required. So then I'll submit it. And so once I was easily able to identify what I did wrong and make those changes, another important step is just letting them know that it was successful. Thank you for submitting your form. We got it. We'll reach out shortly. So now let's look at a form option that does not do it right. So here's another contact form. So a lot of people do like the look of putting the form label right within the input field because it makes it clean, it fits some spaces really nice. The problem with that, if someone is filling out the form really fast, now you can't see what that input field is. And then another thing this form isn't doing is it's not indicating to me exactly which input fields are required. So that's another thing that's been helpful to know. So now if I try to submit this form, you'll see that it's a little bit confusing. First, there is a message up here that's saying that there was a problem with your form submission, but I just wanted to point out the importance of color contrast is you can't really see that message at all unless I highlight it. And then it's highlighting this right here, so I understand that maybe this is where the issue is, but since I can't see the form field, it's not, and then it's not even telling me what I did wrong. I have to delete this, and then I can see, oh, I was supposed to enter an email. But, you know, again, I set up this form, so I know what the issue is. Maybe other users wouldn't be able to figure out what went wrong. And then if I try to submit this again, it still didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is because I didn't put in a message, and this is a required field. But there's no information here indicating to me that that is the problem. So now if I submit it, it will work. But you can see the difference in how it can be frustrating for different users, even ones that don't have any disability, how frustrating it would be to try to figure out what I did wrong. So are error fields important for accessibility? Well, vague error messages can confuse users, especially those with cognitive disabilities. So clear and specific messages help users fix the exact issue without any frustration. And then also you have to consider screen readers. Error messages have to be linked to the form fields. This way, screen readers can announce the errors in context, allowing users with visual impairments to address the issues easily and directly. Okay, now let's talk about text alignment. So for most websites, left-aligned text works best, especially for body content. It's more readable as it mirrors natural reading patterns, languages that go from left to right. So just think about books and magazines that you read. Left to right is the common pattern, and you should follow that with your. You might notice that I've been using center text a lot on this page that I built, and that's okay because this isn't large text. It's just one sentence. And then here it's two sentences. So that's usually very easily managed for users. Where you get in trouble is when you have large paragraphs like this. And that's because we're dealing with like a jagged edge over here. So it's a little bit harder for your eye to know where to go because it's not consistent. And you just have to work a little bit harder, and it's easier to kind of just accidentally skip lines and then have to go back. So it's just a little bit harder to read. You get the same issue with right-aligned text. Yep, it looks really consistent and aligned over here, but when I have to jump back over here, I can easily lose my spot. So how do you choose proper alignment? Well, left align is ideal for those large paragraphs and main content on your site. It's just a lot easier on the eyes and flows naturally for most users. That centered text works for headings, short blurbs, or calls to actions, and it can add emphasis and draw the eye, but it can be really hard to read in that long form text. And right aligned text you should just rarely use. But you can use it for very minimal text areas like author bios or captions, as long as those are really small, and just avoid using it for the body text, as it can make reading really difficult. So in general, let's stick with left alignment for long text and reserve that center alignment for special elements and shorter text, and just use that right alignment sparingly. Okay, now let's talk about the touch targets. So you want to ensure buttons and interactive elements have sufficient click areas, ideally a 44 by 44 pixel radius, and spacing for users that have mobility impairments. So what I mean by that is if we look over here at this, these three, the Facebook, the LinkedIn, and the YouTube icons, see I can easily click on these because I have a cursor that's very precise. But imagine if this was a mobile device. You know, now I'm not using a cursor, I'm using my finger, and my finger is less precise, it's a lot bigger. So if I'm trying to click on this LinkedIn icon here with the setup, I might accidentally click on Facebook or YouTube and get frustrated because I can't easily click on this LinkedIn button. And then also for users that might have a tremor in their hand and are a little bit more shaky with the mouse and can't be as precise, this might also be kind of hard for them to navigate. So instead, we want to make the icons a little bit bigger, space them out a little bit more, because that will help users on desktop that have those issues with stability with their hands, as well as those mobile users that don't have such a precise cursor. So outside of social media icons, where this applies is sliders. So to get this slider to work, I have to click on these dots, and they're pretty small, so that can be hard. So in order to meet this 44 by 44 pixel radius, we really have to blow them up. Okay, just kidding. This is really big, and this might not go with your brand, your aesthetic. It's just bulky, it doesn't look nice. So we have to find a happy medium between too small and just too big. So here you can see we have more of a medium size approach, but this isn't as big as this 44 by 44 pixel requirement that I was recommending. However, the click radius is. So even though my cursor is not quite on that button, you can see that it's still hovering over it and turning into a clickable element. So I spaced it out and added the clickable space around the button without having to make it look so ginormous. I'm still fulfilling those requirements. And then we also have the arrows here, which is something that's naturally a little bit bigger, and that also works. So we do have a little bit of options to make that click radius work for sliders. All right, now let's talk about alt text, which is really important. So alt text is a brief description text added to images used on websites to provide context when the image can't be displayed, or for users who rely on screen readers. So it's essentially for accessibility, helping those visually impaired users understand the content of the images. So when do you need it? We're going to pull up another poll here that I hope you guys can fill out. So which of the following types of images need alt text? All images: decorative stock photos, icons accompanied by descriptive label, images that include task-related information. So I'll give you guys a little bit to make your decisions of when you think images need alt text. All right, so we had most people say all images, and then some say images that include task-related information. And I am not surprised by that answer because that is a common belief. However, the correct answer was, the poll went away from me, but it was the last option here. So when should you use alt text for accessibility? You should use it when an image conveys essential information, like an infographic, a chart, a key visual element. When the image is part of the website's content and also contributes to the overall understanding of the page. If the image is a link, if the image serves as a navigational element, alt text should describe that destination. However, you actually do not need alt text on all images. And that is because if the image is purely decorative and doesn't add any meaning to the page, then you don't need alt text. If the image has surrounding text that already explains the image's content, then you also don't need alt text there. And the reason you don't need it is because you're kind of mucking up screen readers. You're giving them information that they just don't even need to know if it's decorative or if the text is already explained in there. So I want to go through some examples that kind of further explain when you need alt text versus when you don't. Okay, so right here we have two images. This is a stock photo, and then this is one that the client was actually able to take in one of their photo shoots. So, does this stock photo need alt text? The answer is no. The image is purely decorative and it doesn't add any meaning to the content. This is just a simple stock photo that I found on a stock website. I think I used Adobe Stock. And then, does this team photo need alt text? Even though they are both very similar images, people at like a table at a board meeting. And this is also a little bit unfair for you guys because you don't have the context in which the image is being used. But in this example, yes, we do need alt text. And the reason is this is not a stock photo, but it's a real photo taken in a photo shoot. And it's meant to showcase the culture of the company. So this photo does have additional meaning, and the alt text should indicate what that meaning is by talking about the culture of the company and what that photo is conveying. So here we have a chart. Does this chart need alt text? Yes. An image conveys essential, this is an image that is conveying essential information. An infographic, a chart, or a key visual element. And I also want to say that alt text should be included if an image contains text, because screen readers can't read image text because it's embedded within the image. So you do need to add alt text to convey that same information. And I do typically try to refrain from including text within images, but if you do find yourself having to do that, then just make sure you include alt text that explains what that is. And then here we have a background image, and this background image is of Canada, I believe. I think it's an older image, so it has a bit of an older skyline. But does this background image need alt text? The answer is no. Alt text cannot be applied to background images because they are set using CSS rather than HTML, and HTML is what supports that alt tag attribute. And then, does this photo need alt text? It's showing the life cycle of moss. And the answer is yes. This is an image that's conveying essential information. It's an infographic chart, key visual element. The image is part of the website's content and contributes to the understanding of the page. So unless the whole page is just dedicated to talking about the life cycle of moss, if you're talking about moss in general, and then you're including this as like additional information, then you need alt text that describes that life cycle. And then, does this team member photo need alt text? So this is a real photo of a team member. Would it need alt text? Maybe. So if the image has surrounding text that already explains the content, so like if it's her name and her job title and information about her next to this image, then you don't necessarily need it for accessibility. But if the information is not surrounding this image, then you do need it. And then there's also some SEO considerations. So you'll need that alt text for a team photo. So alt text for a team photo in general is not a major factor for SEO unless the image is relevant to search queries. So we do find that many lawyers and doctors that work with clients one-on-one do want to show up in these search queries. So then including information in alt text in that regard would also be important for SEO. All right, we have another live photo here. Does this need alt text? Again, you don't have the context, so it's not fair, but this image is showcasing the clean room manufacturing facility for medical devices. So again, this is a real photo taken by a client to actually highlight their facility. So you'd want to include alt text that gives further information on what the image is highlighting and the purpose of it by showcasing that clean room process. And then finally, does this product photo need alt text? And the answer is yes. Product imagery for sure needs alt text for accessibility, especially for e-commerce websites. People using screen readers rely on that alt text to understand what the product looks like, its key features, and how it relates to their needs. And it's also great for SEO because you want that product imagery to show up in Google image searches. So adding alt text in this case is very beneficial. So you don't need alt text for every single image, and the main type of image you don't need alt text for, again, is images that are just purely decorative. So if you have a lot of stock photography on your website that doesn't add any true value to the content, then you don't need it. All right. And now I'm going to wrap things up by talking about overlaying text and images. So you can see I have a paragraph of text here on this image. And it's really hard to read because the image actually has a little bit of white in here. So some of the words are fine, but overall, I would say there's not enough contrast ratio here to pass the accessibility requirements. So if you can actually read the text, what it's recommending you do is you place an overlay over the image so that it doesn't matter if the image has any colors that match the text. You'll be able to easily read the text no matter what. And then some images that are dark enough, like this one, which is a very dark blue and even has some black in it, you don't have to add anything because there's clearly enough contrast here where the text is always very easy to read. So if I go here to my wave tool and I scroll down, yep, this is what I expected. Contrast flags here saying there's not enough contrast. Oh, maybe this overlay wasn't dark enough. I'm seeing some here. What? There's no way that this isn't enough contrast. Why is it flagging it? And the reason is because these automated tools can't read or interpret images. So these are kind of false. This is kind of a false positive here, because if I click on it, you can see that it's it thinks that it's white text on a white background and it is completely ignoring the image. So that's why it's being flagged as a contrast issue, but there actually is no contrast issues here because this is white text almost on a black background. So there is a tool out there that will help you kind of gauge if the image has enough contrast with the text, and it's this image checker tool. So what you can do here is you can upload your image, you can put in the color of your text, and you can even change the size of the font. And then it tells you, yep, this does not have enough contrast, but you can move the text around and be like, oh, but this text actually does have enough contrast when used with the blue. So I will just make sure to include all of the text here. But you have to consider that websites have many, are viewed on desktops, they're viewed on tablets, they're viewed on mobile phones. So this text might not always be here. It might accidentally go here on like a mobile device. So maybe you have to use a different image when it displays on mobile. So those are definitely considerations to keep in mind when using this tool. You might find an area where it works, but if it doesn't work everywhere, then you just have to consider how that text moves around on different screen sizes. So with that in mind, I know I went over a lot of things very quickly. So what I'm going to do is I am going to hand things back over to Jim for our Q&A session.
Thanks a lot, Jenna. It's great info. I think you recapped a lot of potential accessibility issues as they relate to content. We found that content issues comprise the majority of issues once a site is launched. I think webmasters and content authors really need to be trained on these issues and, have refreshers from time to time for sure. One more thing I wanted to mention about the EAA, the European Accessibility Act, is that the directive explicitly states that overlays, tools and plugins intended to make your site accessible cannot be used in the EU to be considered in compliance. So that's something to keep in mind too if you have any exposure. So let's get to a couple of questions that we've got here. One here, the first one we got from an audience member today. It says, our CMS requires to add alt text on all images. What should we put for alt text on decorative images?
Yeah, so that's actually a good question. And a lot of CMS tools should do this automatically. If they don't, I'm not sure how to manage it in your CMS, but you have to put in an empty tag. So it would be like alt text equals, and then it's like a quote and another quote, and it's empty. So it indicates to tools or search engines a lot of time that the fact that you don't have alt text for this image is on purpose. So you would just have to have an empty alt tag there.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We did get another question or two ahead of time. I'll take the first one here. The question is, why is it important to continuously add content to a website? And I think, generically, there are many reasons. It kind of depends a little bit on what your industry is, who your target audience is, what the objectives of your website are. Is it for lead generation? Is it for informational purposes? But essentially, adding content to a website is going to improve your SEO and search rankings. So search engines have a tendency to favor websites that are regularly updated with fresh, relevant content. And new content provides more opportunities to rank for different keywords, increasing your visibility. Another reason is that, fresh content engages and retains visitors. They may come back. We're talking about, things like new content, thought leadership. Fresh content encourages users to spend more time on your site. That could reduce your bounce rates. You also build authority and credibility with updated and fresh content. And then you might be supporting marketing and sales efforts. You might be having a campaign, a paid ad campaign, a search campaign, or what have you. And you want to be able to build landing pages and fresh content to support those efforts. So again, it kind of depends on, what the objectives of your site are. But those are just a few of the reasons. You really want to keep it fresh, and you want to put thought leadership out there. You want to talk about your industry. You want to talk about what's happening that could benefit your customers in terms of trends. So just keep that in mind. There was a follow-up question to that said, what if I don't have a whole lot of content to add? And that's another good question, again, depending on your industry, but we always recommend that you repurpose or refresh your content. Maybe you take a customer testimonial that you might have or two and convert that into a case study so it has a different narrative to it. But it's, again, talking about a feature and an advantage and a benefit of your business. Maybe you're combining smaller blog posts into more of a comprehensive guide. And so you can repurpose your content that way. Again, just simply updating articles and blogs or product and service descriptions on those types of pages. We refresh our blogs quite frequently. The trends may stay the same, but there may be updates or there may be certain things that you want to be able to impart to your target audience and have that thought leadership readily available. You could add surveys or polls about your industry or about the website's effectiveness. What would you like to see more of? Excuse me, and ask your readers and your users to participate and contribute to what content you could put on there. And at the very least, you could update your homepage with new imagery, refresh that. So there's a variety of ways to be able to, keep it fresh, even if you don't have a whole lot to add. But by doing so, you're keeping relevant and you're certainly signaling to search engines that you have new content for them to index. I don't see, here, I got another question here, just came in. If you are putting images in your page as a background via CSS, is it possible to give that an alt tag?
Background images, is that the question?
It says if you're putting images on your page as a background via CSS, is it possible to give that an alt tag? The other way to look at that is that a good practice, right?
Right. I don't remember, and I had it in my web page. Let me go back to that. Sorry, let me refresh this. Yeah, so here when I talked about background image, okay, it's because they are set using CSS rather than HTML. I don't think you can. I think it has to be because HTML is which supports the alt attribute. There might be some fancy dev work that can be done, but from my understanding, if it's a background image set through CSS, you can't.
All right, thank you, Jenna. And thank you to everyone. Oh, I got another question here. What are the key elements that need to be included in an alt tag?
So the content for an alt tag depends on what important information the image is conveying. Let me go back to my my deck again. So for here, you'd want to indicate what information the chart is providing to users. And then here, this is a really good example. So this one, the purpose of this photo is to help enhance and show and demonstrate the culture of this company. So that's what you would want to write the alt text about. You'd want to write it about what it's representing in terms of the culture. So you don't want to be redundant, and that's really important. That's one of the most important things to know for alt text. So for example, with this product image here, and if you have a lot of product images on your website, you're probably putting what that product name is right next to it within the content of the page. So I wouldn't want the alt text to be redundant of that. Instead, what you want the alt text to convey here is what the product looks like and its key features and how it relates to the user's needs, like things like that. So you have to think about what you're trying to say with the image and the value it's adding to the page, and then that's what your alt text should focus on.
Excellent. Thank you, Jenna. And thank you again, everybody, for your questions. I just want to say, before we wrap things up for today, we'd like to offer everyone in attendance a complimentary consultation to get any additional questions you may have about accessibility compliance or tools you can use to check for accessibility problems. So to request a consultation, visit us at nwsdigital.com/dmconsult and choose Web Accessibility from the Consultation Type field dropdown. We do have a couple of upcoming webinars we think you'll enjoy. Please join us on Thursday, March 13th as we present U and UX, the relationship you probably don't know you need. And on April 10th, we will help you become a digital marketing superhero, tips for SEO success. As always, all of our webinars are complimentary and begin at 10 a.m. Central Time. You can learn more and register at learn@northwoods.com. And if you're looking for information on a specific topic or just want to stay up to date on the latest trends and developments in the constantly changing world of digital, check out our blog, our recorded webinars, our YouTube channel, and we have a brand new vodcast that we've recently launched called Around the Campfire, featuring casual conversations with our experts on all things digital. We encourage you to check that out. And as I mentioned, we'll be sending out a link to this program, so you'll be able to pick up those links when we do that for you. And lastly, if you'd like to learn more about Northwoods and the many services we offer, from website design and development to custom software and digital marketing to digital advertising and marketing strategy, visit us at nwsdigital.com to explore our services and our details, read our client stories, and much more. And after the webinar window closes, a short survey will be available, and we greatly appreciate it if you could share your feedback on how we did this morning. So with that, I'd like to thank each of you and Jenna for joining me today. We look forward to seeing you again very soon. Have a great day and a great rest of your week. Thank you.